Next curve.
Hey everyone, welcome to this Next Curve Rethink podcast episode where once again, actually it's going to be the third time where at least I'm participating in a recap of Mobile World Congress 2024, which took place almost 4 weeks ago. But I'm Leonard Lee, executive analyst at Next Curve, joined by Earl Lum of EJL Wireless and the illustrious Patrick Lopez of Core Analysis. And gentlemen, I'm really happy to have you guys on. We spent some time, actually, Patrick, we should have spent more time with each other. But at least, we had a chance to bump into each other a few times. But really great to have you guys on together. I know that you guys have heard of each other, but never really met each other. And I'm glad I'm bringing you guys together because I highly respect both of you guys, right? Patrick, you've been on before, and Earl, you and I have a little, thing going on here, right? On the Rethink podcast called From the Radio to the Brick. But it's great to have you, these two great minds here to, number one, share their perspectives on what they got out of MWC 2024 in terms of initial impressions or key impressions, and then we're gonna really do a deep dive into RAN, both open and whatever, non-hybrid, traditional blah 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 RAN, and it should be really fun. And we'll have a surprise at the end. One more thing, so you have to stay tuned for the whole episode. But hey, gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us here.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah, no, it's great having both of you. So, Patrick, just really quickly, you and Earl, you as well, quickly, just introduce yourselves, and then let's get rocking and rolling.
All right. Hi, I'm Patrick Lopez. I run a small analyst practice at the intersection of cloud and telecom networks, and I've been very fortunate to be at the inception, witnessing the inception of the first deployments of Open RAN and edge computing when I was heading networks innovation at Telefonica, and later on at NEC when I was leading product management. I was fortunate to deploy Open RAN in possibly the first greenfield and the first brownfield environments in Japan, NTT Docomo, and Rakuten Mobile. So I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, Leonard.
Yeah, of course.
Always great to be able to share thoughts about where this industry is going. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So Earl, remind everybody who you are.
Yes, Uncle Earl, president of EJL Wireless Research, and I've been around since 2G. So I think that pretty much says it all.
Yeah, that does say it all. So, okay, thank you. Thanks for that short, brief intro, everyone. So let's jump right into it. So let's talk about impressions. I've already shared my impression, but then maybe I'll just add on top of whatever it is that you guys come up with. But let's start off with Patrick, since he's the guest of guests. Patrick, what did you think about the show?
It felt like a real Mobile World Congress for the first time in a long time. The amount of people, the energy, the quality of the meetings, and the announcements and the demos. I haven't felt like that for probably 3 to 4 years at Mobile World Congress. So that was a really positive experience.
But in terms of thematically, what were some of the things that popped at you?
Obviously everybody was talking about AI in one form or the other, applied to pretty much anything. It's always the same when you scratch the surface. In many cases, it's Excel macros running in the background. We're all doing a little bit of AI probably from that measure. Also, interesting to see progress and announcement against the Open API movement for the wireless networks. it looks like the momentum and the speed of deployment and adoption is much faster than a lot of initiatives in the past years that we've seen. So that's interesting. And in the RAN, the big news came before Mobile World Congress, from my perspective, particularly on Open RAN, both starting last quarter with the Vodafone announcement of its RFQ and a large portion dedicated to Open RAN. And then later on, obviously, the deal between AT&T that saw Ericsson announced officially, basically, its endorsement and deployment of Open RAN, even in a multi-vendor setting, because we're seeing Fujitsu part of that deal. So a lot of reactions to that from different vendors, different operators, and as well. I know I fielded a lot of questions from a lot of different parties on what that means for let's say the market at large, and then for Open RAN specifically, and then for Ericsson and its competitors. So pretty busy time.
Yeah, this guy right over here, he kind of I don't need to say much more than that, right? Yeah. So yeah, that whole AT&T deal, we actually have a podcast on that. So for folks who are interested in listening, just go to the Rethink webcast, either on Buzzsprout or here on YouTube. So, but no, I think those were some of the big themes. So, those are great impressions and observations. So, Earl, what about you?
My focus was, more on the actual hardware. Obviously, AI was everywhere and everyone was talking about it, but really, in terms of what I was trying to get out of it was looking at the equipment on the towers and the rooftops, the antennas. The antennas are a critical part of the overall network. It's often overlooked, but now we have massive MIMO, so we have active antennas, so we have passive antennas, and we have now transparent antenna technology. So my focus, it was really about the radios and it was about the antennas at the show. And I think the one thing that, like Patrick was saying, yes, it was at the same level of crowdedness at the show this year. I have a new watch now because of the one that got stolen. So I'm happy about that and getting bugged. But I was due, right?
Barcelona, it's such
it's your price to pay to go there. But what really was what always impresses me and blows me away is what I see at Huawei's booth, because that sets the standard, in my opinion, for the technology that's there or the upcoming technology. And, it really sets the bar for everyone else as to what they need to get to if they want to be successful. And I think, the guys at Ericsson did a great job in unveiling what they had. Even guys like FiberHome or CICT Mobile, everyone had some very interesting things in their booths. So it was a great opportunity to be able to see behind the walls, so to speak. To be able to see the real technology that wasn't available to everyone that was on the show floor. So, and was very impressed. Thankfully, we didn't hear a lot about 5.5G too much. And we certainly didn't see much of anything regarding 6G, right, out there. But the main issue now and the question going forward for everyone listening is, where's the money going to come from to support 5.5G or 5G Advanced? And is there any money going to be left over to even think about 6G as we move forward? Or is the model broken?
Yeah, I think those are really profound questions that need to be asked. And, one of the things I made this comment before, and it's probably going to become my tagline for my impression for MWC 2024 is that, let's focus on the present first. And I think, if we can jump into now the Open RAN or the RAN discussion, and we're talking about broadly here, right, Patrick? Because I know that you're not just looking at radios; you're looking all the way out to SMO and probably even core.
Yeah.
That there needs to be more of a focus on the present, and I think one of the big misses from of the Open RAN movement has been sort of this disregard of what front hauls actually look like and what's available, and then the assumptions around how much operators would invest in basically revamping everything so that it fit, let's say, the initial thoughts about how the Open RAN deployments would look like and where workloads would be distributed, and what aspects of the L2, L1 processing would happen across the infrastructure. So and so that I want to start off with that, and maybe Patrick, get your reaction, because I don't think it's any secret. Yes, there's some traction. There is traction in Open RAN. It's going to have an influence going forward. But what are your thoughts in terms of the things that are going well, and then the things where you think that the movement still needs to tune into a more grounded direction and perspective? Or do you think it's all working out great?
There are probably at least two schools of thought.
At least.
Matter, at the very least, right? I think the main news is that Open RAN is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? The resistance to Open RAN as an architectural blueprint is reducing day to day. I think with one of the promises, so there were several promises of Open RAN, right? Some have been realized and some haven't. The main promise of Open RAN, or what started the Open RAN movement, was the reduction in terms of total cost of ownership, right? And by and large, this is still to be proven over time. But total cost of ownership, we're talking about, at the scale of a network, we're talking about amortization periods, right? And amortization periods for the RAN is 5 to 6 years, more or less, right? And so you need to have a full cycle to evaluate, and you can't really count the cost of deployment, because the cost of deployment is pretty much the same, whether you're doing it with the traditional vendor or a new vendor. It's you're going to deploy. Yeah. Maybe in Open RAN it's a little faster because it's more recent, so there's more automation, and therefore the deployment itself, besides the physical work, might be a little faster, so there might be some economies there, but the costs are comparable. Yeah. So we're not at the end of this period yet where somebody has deployed Open RAN at scale and gone through a complete cycle of TCO to be able to compare effectively. The signs, though, are encouraging because, TCO is a lot of different things, right? Sure. If we look at the radio themselves, compared to, let's say, the traditional radio vendors, they're a little cheaper because they are less complex. There's less electronics in the radio itself, right? Obviously, there is something that we all need to keep in mind. If you're going to deploy Open RAN, in most cases, I would hope it's virtual RAN, which means that you need to have a cloud-native infrastructure below, which means you need to have a virtualization layer, and you need to have servers, commercial on the shelf, some level of acceleration for DU. So you can't compare Open RAN versus traditional RAN without comparing Open RAN versus traditional virtual RAN, right? You have to do apple-to-apple comparison. So, and on that front, again, it looks better. We have seen a lot of vendors moving away from having their own virtualization layer and adopting industry, not standard, but like de facto standard industry industrialization layer. So that contributes to reducing costs. The servers, well, I mean, we're all familiar with commercial off-the-shelf versus, specific servers. The acceleration part of it is coming down because there's a lot of work and money that's being spent on actually first have a layer between the layer 1 and layer 2, so you can actually port different DUs on the installation, and then there's more volume. And at last, you see a lot of vendors starting to emphasize more the automation part and the OpEx things that are associated with the deployment, but the running and optimization, either of the spectrum or the power utilization. So that's one part. Open RAN, another part of Open RAN, another promise was emergence of new vendors. And that also contributes to reducing TCO because more competition, mechanically, let's say more price erosion. We've seen some of that. I mean, for me, when operators said they wanted Open RAN for multi-vendors, in many cases, what they meant was, we want 3 vendors. It's enough. And 4 is too many, at least to start with, so we want at least another vendor. And we've seen, Samsung is probably on every metrics the winner of the Open RAN market over the last couple of years, right? There are many reasons for that. Sorry, I don't want to go into a long monologue, but these are kind of a few aspects of the RAN promise that are being fulfilled and those that still need some work.
Okay, cool. What about you? What are your thoughts, Earl?
Well, I think if you're looking at the core part of the network, the dense urban area, the massive MIMO part that we're all used to seeing, then it's not going to be a new vendor, or if it is, it'll be a Samsung being the third vendor that's out there, but it won't be an emerging player because they just won't have the scale, right? And that was the problem from the beginning of the Open RAN, at least from my perspective of looking at the radios and looking at the rest of the software that you need. And if you're just going to make a 4T4R radio, then yes, it is going to be a lot simpler. And you could put that in the rural markets, or if you're trying to do a private network and you need small cells and you want a network in a box, then again, that might be a great opportunity still out there for the Open RAN community. But if you're trying to make a dual band, wideband, 64T massive MIMO radio system, and you want to have 20,000 subscribers capacity on it, then I think that's still going to be the 3 Western incumbents that are going to be participating in that marketplace because they have the scale, they have the ability to warranty and to fix everything. And again, I think it adds some additional costs in that, one component that really a lot of people haven't talked about is the cell site router. How do you get from the server to the actual radio? Because you don't hook up all the fiber optics to the server. You need something else. And that used to be in the baseband unit, and it used to be all integrated together. Now we've disaggregated it all, and now you need a second virtual cell site router box in addition to the actual server to then connect to all the radios. And that was, again, a missing piece that people aren't really talking about. I know Samsung recently unveiled their virtual cell site router product, but I think that's another key component. And that's, again, adding costs to every one of these sites or the locations. And again, the whole issue of fiber. Most of the operators around the world are not going to have unlimited fiber. So how do you do this Open RAN in a more distributed RAN architecture? And can you do it that way? Or for those few that are in the elite that can actually have everything centralized or on a cloud, then yeah, they're going to continue to move forward there, but that leaves everyone else in the world behind. And what's the solution for them in terms of Open RAN is still something that I really haven't seen being discussed a lot. And so I think, what is Open RAN for a non-fiber rich environment, and what are those operators, what can they do to move forward and continue along this path?
Yeah, and I think, if we even look at, I had a recent conversation with a friend about Huawei and the Chinese vendors who are less constrained by this, sort of broad Western mandate for vendors to and operators to adopt Open RAN principles and agendas. In particular the operators, right? And that. They continue to evolve the traditional RAN architectures, and it's becoming more cloud native. And so these companies are not devoid of the enabling technologies, these new architectures themselves, right? And so, when you talk about the real time, the RAN intelligent controller and the R apps and the X apps and these the concepts that we think are unique to Open RAN, they're actually not unique at all. They're just expressed differently amongst the traditional vendors, including the likes of Nokia and Ericsson. And if we're to call out Ericsson specifically in their Cloud RAN offerings, right? I mean, that's really sort of cloud native representation of or implementation of their traditional stuff. And so I think the good thing is that finally we're starting, it seems like, this is my observation, I'd love to get both of your reactions. It seems like we're moving away from like sort of these initial religious tenets of Open RAN and starting to actually opening up Open RAN. You know what I'm saying? So that the standard can start to address some of the deficiencies in the initial assumption set. I don't know. What do you think, Patrick? Let's start with you.
Well, Open RAN through the ORAN Alliance has made a lot of progress, right? There's an enormous amount of work that's being done there. And we've seen ORAN Alliance starting its path towards adoption and at least a liaison with ETSI and with GPP. So the architecture of Open RAN and the interfaces of Open RAN are slowly being adopted and baked into the standard, the Bible of how to build a telecoms network. So that's certainly that allows basically more uniformity and definitely provides more interoperability. At the same time, we've seen, vendors proposing new interfaces, particularly front-haul interfaces, because they feel that the current front-haul interfaces do not satisfy the traffic requirement of a modern network, particularly for massive MIMO and particularly for uplink. So there's still possibility of divergence or at least multiple implementation of the same architecture. But from what I've seen, well, first it's making its way through the ORAN Alliance in terms of work schedule and adoption. And probably is going to be adopted over the summer session. And second, most vendors I spoke with, even those vendors that, don't believe that it is necessary, have pledged that they will basically follow the market. And if their customer think it's a necessary adjustment, well, they'll implement it. So I have no doubt that, Open RAN is becoming, let's say, more interoperable and versatile.
Well,
I want to go back to one of your first comment, though. I don't think that Open RAN is good for everything. And I don't think that Open RAN is going to replace traditional RAN. I think that what we have to resist, if we believe that the future of 5G or the promise of 5G is to create different connectivity products for different use cases, different verticals, geography, devices, then you have to resist the one-size-fits-all approach. You have to resist the tendency that we have had in telecom to try to simplify and to find the optimum in terms of the range of products or the number of suppliers, and get what's the minimum number of okay, I'm going to take for Massive MIMO, I'm going to take this one, and for 88R this one, and for T I'm going to take this one, and that doesn't satisfy everything I need, but it's satisfy 80%, and that's sufficient. I think what Open RAN provides is more flexibility, so you can start creating things that are fit for purpose rather than optimums. And I think that there will be need for every type of architecture: traditional RAN, Open RAN, even proprietary, because there are many different kind of needs that cannot all be satisfied by one architecture today and in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And, even in your comment about the ULPI variation of the Cat-B interface, it boils down to it's okay if you don't like it, then you have to technically prove and productize your own justification, right? And then at the end of the day,
I'm going to interrupt you here because there are Massive MIMO radios today, Cat-A, that are deployed commercially in fairly intense radio environments, and they work fine with 702.x. I'm not saying that they cannot be improved, but it's been proven that you can deploy a Cat-A Massive MIMO in a commercial environment without degradation of performance. So it's not a given that a new interface is necessary at all costs.
Sure. But then there's it's still the option though. If what I'm saying is that a providing option actually opens things up, and it makes the whole standard support multiple technologies and at least some kind of open plug-in to the rest of the stuff, right? Yeah. And that's kind of like my point. And so if you're going to argue there isn't a necessity for one rather than excluding it, compete in the modality that you're trying to justify, and then innovate the hell out of that particular architectural direction versus trying to restrict others. I think that's the healthy opening in Open RAN that I see. And you're bringing in more people into the conversation in that way. It's just sort of I guess the gist of my comment. But you're making you make another great point. So, but it's a vector of innovation that that fosters, I think, competition. And none of that is detrimental. I think it's all healthy, right?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I misspoke.
No.
There's no Cat-A Massive MIMO. It's Massive MIMO is Cat-B, but then it's whether you use the UOP interface or not. So
yeah.
Anyways, what I meant is you can deploy Massive MIMO today without this new interface, and the market will choose. Yeah.
Thoughts there, Earl?
I think if you look at the hardware itself, you've made it into a server, right? So you're not buying a purpose-built baseband unit that was extremely optimized for what it was supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And so now we have servers for the cell site router. We have servers for the actual DU and CU. But then at the end of the day, why would you not still be running Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung software on those servers becomes the biggest question for the operator from a risk perspective. and from a performance perspective. So I've opened up the hardware so that is more commoditized and generic, but the actual software is still the IP of the incumbents. And is there a new guy coming in, at least on the RAN side, that's going to be able to be up to par or at that bar of expectations for the operators, because they're expecting the Ferrari that they've already are driving, and they're not going to want someone giving them a Honda. No offense to the Honda people, and I own a Honda, but again, there's a perception there of what that bar is from the operators and what they're used to getting and what their expectations are that has to come from Open RAN for them to want to adopt it. And at the end of the day, yes, maybe there's other software players that are doing the orchestration and some of the other stuff there, but the core part of the RAN software is still going to most likely be from the three Western suppliers. So is that still open at that point? Because most of the openness that we've seen has really been from the radio side and having secondary radio suppliers and such. Again, my belief is that Team Japan has enough money to be able to do stuff and to be able to support all the flavors of the radios out there. And whether it's Oryx or whatever Docomo's doing or some of these other organizations, that's going to be interesting. And then obviously this new AI RAN group, how does that fit in and merge with parallel to Open RAN? Or does that confuse the hell out of everyone's perception now? What direction do we need to go? Right?
Yeah. That's an interesting comment, because I a couple of days ago, I was in an analyst session. It was a Q&A with Jensen Huang, and for those of you who don't know who he is, he's the CEO of NVIDIA. Anyways, quite the character. But he was asked in the final question about telco, and he had of course, he talked about the AI RAN concept, and one of the interesting things that he mentioned was that in order for these autonomous concepts to happen right around RAN and AI infused and enabled automations to happen, or optimizations to happen, that everything had to be software defined, right, including the radio. So he brought up software defined radio. So it was interesting to listen and speak about it. But I think we're still pretty far away from that, even though it'll be interesting to see how that AI RAN, are they called the AI RAN Alliance? Is that what it is, Patrick? Or yeah, it is the AI RAN Alliance, how they'll influence and shape the evolution of Open RAN and everything else. So I don't know. I mean, what were your thoughts? And maybe we'll end on this whole idea of AI RAN Alliance and what they're suggesting as a sort of pre-wrap-up topic.
So next week, which by the time it's released, maybe it will be this week when people listen to it, I'm going to attend and speak at a conference and Plug Fest, or the Demo Fest, that is organized by NTIA and the U.S. Department of Defense, and it's about RIC, and it's about apps. And you have to wonder, why is the U.S. government and the Department of Defense interested in Open RAN and RIC and apps? There are several reasons for that, but it boils down to one thing, basically. RAN intelligence and AI in the RAN allows you to do things that were not possible before, or that were extremely difficult and expensive to do before, right? And if you do U.S. government, people might not know it or realize it, but they run hundreds of private networks. And DoD in particular, the bases, carriers, ad hoc network for tactical units, all of those things, and until now, well, you had to buy very specialized radios to do what you needed, which was creating a network that was super secure, and within that network, creating subnets, slices, for different kind of devices or different people with different characteristics. Open RAN and generally open and disaggregated networks reduces the cost of doing that drastically. And then on top of that, the RIC provides an aspect that was difficult to do in a multi-vendor environment, which is programmability. Which is basically the ability to change a lot of the attributes of the RAN without having to actually put your hand in the engine and go bring up a CLI into a monitor on a base station, right? So from that perspective, you can do a lot of things that range from, creating slice and creating attributes of network. But I mean, you think of if you go all the way to X apps or D apps that are being started to be spoke about, which are directly on the radio, you can manipulate waveforms, right? And if you manipulate waveforms and beams, you can do that for all sorts of reasons, either, for optimization, like we do in telecoms, to have better spectral efficiency, but you could do it for other reasons, creating, interference is just the
jamming.
Interference is just the other side of optimization, and it can have its use as well, right? So AI, or rather like being able to use data for programmability in the RAN is interesting for a lot of different use cases, particularly if we talk about private networks, particularly if we talk about creating connectivity products that are specialized, and because all of that is cloud native, and because all of that is reacting on seconds or even sub-seconds kind of latency, you can do that manually, or you shouldn't. And therefore, you need to have a lot of algorithmics to do a lot of automation. And for the first time, you can extract data from a lot of different vendors and put that into a coherent framework, and not only observe it, but actually create rules to change it. And for me, that's, I mean, the promise of AI in the RAN, it's really beyond the autonomous aspect of, okay, I put it there and I don't need to touch it. It's actually the configuration and the management and let's say the on-demand connectivity attributes that could unlock.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a completely different angle, right? And actually, it would apply to many different private network scenarios. And so,
I mean, think about it. I like my operator customer don't like me to use this analogy, but Mercedes or Audi or Magna probably know better what they need in terms of connectivity from an automotive slice than any network operator. And they probably don't want the network operator to sell it to them. What they want is to be able to configure it themselves, right? So, I mean, obviously, to do that, you need a number of things, but that's one of the attributes.
Interesting. Earl, were you going to say something?
I think on the defense side, at least here in the U.S., if we look at who the players have been, they have been the Ericssons and the Nokias who are getting the contracts on these bases. So again, yes, there's flexibility, but it's still one of the incumbents who's doing the whole turnkey or the integration level and responsible for the overall project for each of these networks at the bases that they're getting the contracts for. So, where is the opportunity for the newer players in this situation that, again, is supposed to bring in new vendors and be open? Is it just strictly on the server side that we're seeing that, or, the radio and the software is probably going to be again, delivered by an Ericsson or a Nokia or somebody else.
Well, they're both bringing in RICs and SMOs. A lot of them are either ORAN compliant or straight up ORAN. Just ORAN. So I mean, I think this whole idea that you alienate certain income, it's no longer becoming an incumbent versus ORAN pure player thing anymore. It's Open RAN. And I never really thought it was that to begin with, right? It's Open RAN is an operator's decision. And I think, Patrick, to your point, it has to cater to the demands of the customer, and that standard needs to serve their purpose. It's not a vendor thing. At least that's my impression. And I think that's why I think for a lot of the traditional Open RAN players, it's a bit of an uncomfortable thing to get used to, the fact that the so-called incumbents actually have a stake and a play in Open RAN, because their customers are starting to develop that stake that I think you indicated is becoming more evident, right? And so I think from my perspective, I agree with you, Patrick. This is going to become more of a hybrid-ish, mixed situation where Open RAN based solutions or compliant solutions are going to, and architectures are going to have to play with traditional. In terms of the vendors, I think they're going to play across the field to support and cater to what their customers want, whether it's the large operators or down to like some of these private network operators. So anyways, that's my take. But hey, Jet, you know what? This is really cool, because I love, Patrick, how you just came in and just added like some education to the whole discussion here. It's like, no, actually this happened. It's like the debate is always nice, and it's great to kind of work through the intersections of our agreements and work through the divergence of our disagreements. So, Patrick, it's great to have you on again. I really appreciate you jumping on and providing the audience your insights and your thoughts on what I think is a matter that I hope we come back to at MWC 2024 with a hell of a lot more perspective than I think we might have seen this year. At least that's my take on it. But really quickly, what would you like to see in terms of progress or adjustments going into MWC 2025 for Open RAN? So starting off with you, Patrick.
Progress. Well, I'd like to see brownfield Open RAN, multi-vendor deployment, commercial deployment in Western Europe and North America started.
Yeah, that's
that's what many operators promise, right? So I'd like at the next Mobile World Congress to actually see signs of that, more than trials and actual commercial deployments with real data.
I like that. I like that angle. It's like, okay, operators, your guys' turn to deliver on your promise, right? It's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, and hopefully regulators and governments as well, because they've also haven't, I don't think, delivered on their promises in many instances. So, Earl, what about you?
I think we're going to obviously know who the winners are from the Vodafone tender by that point in time next year. So that'll pretty much tell us who is going to be playing and who's not going to be playing, right? And everyone's going to look at why they chose those vendors and are probably going to say, well, obviously there was a lot of thought and consideration that went in from a scale and everything else that you have to consider if you're looking at 170,000 sites, both in Europe and in Africa. So those winners are probably going to end up being driving, the whole the eventual endpoint of where Open RAN gets to, because they will have now the mass and scale of the deployments in commercial networks, and everyone else who doesn't make it into that tender is going to, again, it won't mean that they're completely shut out, but it'll mean that, okay, we've now kind of set the bar as to what we need for a real high density deployment, and here are the vendors that can do this, and then we'll see what is required in private networks, what's required in rural and other applications, and I think those other vendors are going to have to look elsewhere and in those other markets for opportunities.
Interesting. So thanks to both of you gentlemen for opining here. So this is what you guys can all expect, or at least what these gentlemen are expecting at MWC 2025, and who cares what I think, right? But hey, you know what? To our audience, these two gentlemen have reports coming out. So I'm going to give both of you a chance to share with the audience, some details and, some timelines for your report. So Patrick, let's start off with you, sir.
Thanks, Leonard. So I'm just finishing it up. So within the next 10 days before the end of March, I should be able to release it. It's called State of Open RAN 2024, and it goes through the product set, deployment, integration, capabilities, and strategy of the main vendors and the main operators in that field. And it goes from RU to CU, DU, O-Cloud, servers, accelerators, SMO, non-real-time RIC, near real-time RIC, LAP, and XApp. So I'm trying to make it as exhaustive as possible.
Yeah, 90 pages, right?
Right now, it's a little over 100. That was...
oh, wow. Yeah, so everyone, definitely check it out. And so where can they find it? They can find it on your website, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They can.
Because people have been asking for it.
And yeah, they can just contact me, and I provide them with terms and conditions. I'm sorry, this is not a free report. It's going to be a commercial paywall, but my clients know where to find me, and you can reach out to me directly at my email address or my blog, Core Analysis.
Okay, you want to share really quickly? So it's www.coreanalysis.com or?
Yeah, that's it's Core Analysis 1. Blogspot.com. So that's the blog itself. You can find it on my LinkedIn profile.
Okay,
that's probably the easiest way to access to it, or through my website, coreanalysis.ca.
CA. Okay. Remember that, everyone. CA. And, there have been people wondering, well, how do we get a hold of that report? And so please support Patrick's research. And he does great stuff. Obviously, well-recognized expert in the field. And so check out his report when it drops, all 100 plus pages of it. Okay, Earl, what about you?
Yes, Leonard. So updating the baseband reports and the radio reports and the antenna reports. So there'll be a trifecta of reports coming out over the next several weeks. Your standard 5-year forecasts of what's going to be happening. And some of them are over 100 pages because they're just full of numbers. Some of them are going to be a lot less because it's just me talking about what's happening with the market and the market share, obviously, and where are the Chinese suppliers relative to the non-Chinese suppliers out there, and has anything really changed? And I think that's going to be key in understanding, what's the operator spend going to be looking like over the next 5 years as well, right? Because there's certain hot spots across the world, and then what does the world look like outside of China? I think is the real key question that everyone wants to understand, specifically here in North America as well as over in Europe. So those will be out over the next 4 to 8 weeks.
Wow, awesome. So it sounds like these are the two reports every single vendor and operator in the world needs to check out, right? So reach out to both of these gentlemen. So Patrick Lopez at Core Analysis at www.coreanalysis.ca, not com, ca. And reach out to him on LinkedIn. And of course, the illustrious Earl Lum, the Mac Daddy of RAN radios, of ejailwireless.com. And just reach out to both of these gentlemen and not only tap into their insights and their research, but then check out their reports. They're both very well known for their expertise as well as their beautiful reports, all hundreds of pages of it. And so, gentlemen, thank you so much for jumping on. I really appreciate it. I think this was a really great session. Hopefully it was really insightful and entertaining for the audience. And, hope to have you guys on again. And, definitely we'll see you at MWC 2025, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to our podcast here, like, share, and all that good stuff. We're featured here on the Next Curve YouTube channel. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout or find us on your favorite podcast platform. And also subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights and some of the brightest minds in the industry sharing insights that matter. And until next time, take care.